Now for her first British interview on British television by Melissa Gira-Grant, a journalist, a former sex worker and the author of Playing the Whore, The Work of Sex Work, and also by Labour MEP Mary Honeyball. The European Parliament voted last month in favour of her report, recommending that selling sex should be legalised, but buying it should be prohibited. Melissa, you say when we talk about sex work, there's too much emphasis on the sex, not enough on the work, that essentially it's a job like any other. I mean, from your experience, why do you feel that?
Well, I actually don't just speak from my own experience, and I think that's part of the reason we get so hung up in these debates about sex work, is we try to say this one person's experience justifies what our policy should be. But in fact, I speak from a breadth of experience as a journalist, as an advocate who's worked in these communities and seen that sex work actually covers a range of experiences, good, bad, and indifferent. But was it not informed at all by your own experience? That's really not the point, and I think that's really, one of the places where I hope we can come to some common ground is rights are rights are rights, whether someone loves their job, hates their job, or is indifferent, and sex workers should be afforded the same labour rights as any other worker.
You say that you don't want to speak on behalf of all sex workers, that your experience may not be the same as theirs, yet you have categorically come to the conclusion that it is, in your view, in the interests of all sex workers, that it shouldn't be criminalised.
That's actually what sex workers say about their work, that criminalisation will actually expose them to more violence, to more danger, will put them into positions of more social marginalisation that makes them seem like targets for violence for those who are already looking for targets of violence.
But yes, when you look back at your own experience, was it, would you say, a positive experience?
My own experience simply isn't the point. Human rights are human rights. They don't really depend upon one individual's experience. These are inalienable rights to protection, to safety, to health.
And why I look today, you don't appear to want to talk about your own experience. I mean, surely it's valid in terms of the work that you've done as a journalist, the arguments you're putting forward.
I write about all different kinds of sex workers' experiences and many experiences that I personally haven't had. My focus is really on police violence, on the consequences of criminalisation and access to health and safety. That's my focus.
And in terms of a job, is it a job that you would actively encourage, say, young women, a daughter, a sister, to take up?
I think anyone deserves to have a job where they're respected on that job, no matter what that job is.
Mary, the point Melissa is making is that actually criminalising sex work is not really the point. It is about making sex work work for the women who do it.
But the point is that sex work in this country is already criminalised. Prostitution itself is not a criminal offence, but everything connected with it is. Soliciting, pimping, running a brothel, working together. So it is actually a criminal activity to all intents and purposes. So what you showed in that film at the beginning, actually most of those people are committing a criminal offence. And I think we need to bear that in mind.
But also in the film, one of the women said criminalising the men will only drive it underground. And that makes it more dangerous for the women involved, doesn't it?
Well, I have done a lot of research into this, and the model that I've been advocating, that the buyer is the one who is criminalised, has been in existence in Sweden since 1999. And the Swedish police say that prostitution has halved in Sweden since that time.
That's actually not true. We don't have statistics on how much prostitution there was in Sweden before the adoption of the law, so we simply can't make a comparison to what things look like now. And in fact, some Swedish agencies are saying that trafficking has increased as a result of this, that there's been more pimping as a result of this. So there's lots of different perspectives on the impact of the law, but the reality is we simply don't have the information to know if it's been effective.
It's always very difficult in this debate because it is difficult to get statistics, and I do totally accept that, because a lot of this is underground.
That does hint at the reason that the MPs and people like yourself who are arguing this, it's a moral argument, isn't it? Because it's not based on statistics.
It's a moral argument
based on
as well, but we know that human trafficking is going up, and we know that an awful lot of women who work in prostitution have been trafficked. The EU thinks it's such a problem that they've appointed a member of staff to act as an anti-trafficking coordinator. And the EU's put together a lot of information, and 62% of those who are trafficked in the EU are trafficked for sexual exploitation. So it is a very real issue.
In the rest of the world, though, the International Labour Organization actually has trafficking into the sex industry at a much smaller percentage than trafficking into other industries. So my question is, where is the focus on other kinds of labour trafficking that are also hugely important?
I mean, I think human trafficking, for whatever the purpose, is wrong, and I would fight all forms of trafficking, which I do believe is modern slavery.
But where within your argument is the issue of choice, the women who are choosing to do this? Why should you have anything to do with that?
Well, the point about what I'm advocating is that it actually will make the buyer of sexual services, who in most cases, the overwhelming majority of cases, is a man, he will be the person who is criminalised, not the women. So this argument, I think, is a little bit tortuous because the women will not be criminalised. They will be able to come
No,
forward.
but if you
they will be able
criminalise the
to
men,
do
you're
the
taking an
sorts of-
active decision that prostitution in effect is wrong, and therefore you are interfering with the choice of women who choose it as a profession.
Well,
presumably
no
is your
more than the
argument.
current law. That's the point. Almost every country in the world, there are one or two exceptions, but almost every country in the world has laws against prostitution. They criminalises prostitution one way or another and regulates it. All I'm suggesting
I think
is a
that's an
shift in
important
emphasis.
distinction, though, that criminalization actually is a form of regulation. And if we look at this from a perspective of workers' rights, that's a form of regulation that's actually taken out of the hands of the workers and put into the hands of the police. I'm very concerned when I see things like the Soho raids, which we just watched a little bit of, where we have hundreds of police being tasked with protecting people from something that they're already, because, as you say, they're in a criminalized state. They aren't regarded as actual workers. They're in an antagonistic relationship with the police. When you're proposing more criminal penalties...
Do you see that many people will find it very, very difficult to regard sex work as just any other job? Do you understand
I'm not asking
that?
them to regard it as any other job. I'm asking them to respect the rights of people who do any job to actually have access to safety, to healthcare, and not be exposed to violence through this
yes,
form
do
of
you accept
criminalization.
that many-
You about safety and healthcare, absolutely. And in my report, which went before the European Parliament, I actually did put a lot of emphasis on that. I mean, I am in no way seeking to undermine women who currently work in prostitution, and I want them to have proper healthcare, work in a safe environment. And
What would you
I've
say then
always
about
said that.
the recommendations from UNAIDS, from the World Health Organization, that actually criminalization compromises sex workers' access to health care?
Do you accept that there are victims within prostitution, that many women are forced to do it, young girls are forced to do it, that
Of course,
there is
there's
violence?
exploitation in all kinds of industries, but I think placing criminal penalties on the work itself, no matter who is criminalized, whether that's the buyer, the seller, or everyone, actually exacerbates the problem and pushes people further away from the help and resources they need, whether that's looking to the police for protection, whether that's talking to a health outreach worker. We don't want to be making people who are already very isolated even more isolated.
In terms of
Points of agreement at the end at all?
In terms of
Very
Melissa's
briefly.
argument about benefits and about where it's legalised, women in prostitution have better healthcare and better benefits. Actually, in Germany,
the
where
case in New
prostitution
South
is
Wales.
legalised,
Really
most
sorry.
of them do not take it up.
We are going to have to end it there. Thank you both very much, Cathy.
Thanks, Jackie.